In 1959, Los Angeles police discovered a hidden vault beneath an abandoned church in Silver Lake. Inside were 27 journals documenting rituals that none of the officers had seen in their careers. The names of 38 missing persons filled those pages. Not one body was ever found. If you are intrigued, stay until the end, because what we are about to reveal goes beyond the official investigations. Leave a comment from where you are watching and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's go to the beginning of everything. Los Angeles, 1957. The city was experiencing unprecedented growth, sprawling across valleys and hillsides. New churches appeared alongside movie theaters, promising salvation and community in a rapidly changing world. On Western Avenue, between the shadows of new apartment buildings, stood the Temple of Divine Truth, a modest structure with a simple wooden sign. Its founder, Dr. Malcolm Reeves, had arrived in California just 3 years earlier, a charismatic man with piercing blue eyes and a doctorate in comparative religion from an unspecified European university. Those who knew Reeves described him as intensely magnetic. His voice carried a peculiar cadence, soft yet commanding. He dressed impeccably in tailored suits and spoke with authority about universal truths and cosmic harmony. At 47 years old, he had the confidence of someone who had found all the answers in a world filled with Cold War anxiety. The temple began modestly with Sunday services, attracting 30 to 40 attendees. Reeves spoke about unity, transcendence, and the illusion of death. His sermons wove together Eastern philosophy with Christian imagery, creating something comforting yet exotic to his predominantly middle-class white audience. According to newspaper archives, his congregation grew steadily throughout 1957, attracting those dissatisfied with traditional religion but still seeking spiritual fulfillment. Eleanor Whitman, 63, was among the first regular attendees. A widow whose husband had died in 1953, she found herself drawn to Reeves's promise of communication with departed loved ones. Dr. Reeves helped me understand that death is merely transformation, she told her sister in a letter recovered years later. What Eleanor didn't mention was that she had recently refinanced her home, withdrawing nearly $20,000. The money disappeared into temple accounts. She wasn't alone. By early 1958, the temple had over 100 registered members, most contributing 10% of their income as spiritual investment. Those closest to Reeves gave considerably more. According to banking records obtained during the subsequent investigation, the temple collected approximately $275,000 in just 18 months, equivalent to nearly $3 million in today's currency. While the financial foundation of the temple grew stronger, subtle changes began appearing in Reeves's teachings. His sermons increasingly focused on mankind's corruption and the need for purification. He introduced the concept of the faithful, those who would transcend death and witness universal rebirth. According to former member Thomas Hargrove, who left the group in early 1958, Reeves began speaking about a final communion that would unite believers permanently. There was something about the way he said final that made me uncomfortable, Hargrove told investigators. It was like watching someone slowly remove a mask. Something cold appeared in his eyes when he spoke about it. By summer 1958, Reeves had established an inner circle known as the Vessels, 12 individuals given special privileges and responsibilities within the temple. All were required to donate at least 70% of their assets to the temple and live on temple grounds. According to temple records, these 12 individuals collectively contributed over $400,000 to Reeves's organization. Among the Vessels was Margaret Brennan, 34, a nurse at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital. Formerly practical and level-headed, according to colleagues, Margaret underwent a profound transformation after meeting Reeves. She abandoned her career, sold her house, and moved into the temple's newly constructed dormitory. Her diary, recovered during the investigation, reveals a woman increasingly detached from reality. "Dr. Reeves touched my forehead today during meditation," she wrote on July 23, 1958. "I felt my consciousness expand beyond this limited body." He says, "I'm almost ready to serve as a true vessel." What exactly Margaret was being prepared for became clearer in later entries. Reeves had begun discussing the concept of physical transcendence, a process requiring the complete surrender of the body to achieve spiritual elevation. According to former members, this philosophy was introduced gradually, beginning with fasting and sleep deprivation, then progressing to more extreme forms of physical denial. While the inner circle grew more isolated, the outer congregation continued expanding. By late 1958, Sunday services attracted nearly 300 attendees. Local newspapers occasionally covered the temple, describing it as an alternative spiritual movement, reflecting the growing interest in Eastern philosophy. None recognized the darker currents flowing beneath its surface. Frank Miller, a reporter for the Los Angeles Examiner, attended services twice in October 1958. His unpublished notes describe an atmosphere of controlled euphoria, with members appearing glassy-eyed and unnaturally compliant. Miller planned a deeper investigation, but abandoned it after receiving an anonymous letter containing details about his daughter's school schedule and daily routine. The implied threat achieved its purpose. As 1959 began, Reeves announced the temple's expansion. Using the substantial funds collected from members, he purchased a 5-acre property in the hills above Los Angeles. The remote location, accessible by a single unpaved road, provided the isolation he increasingly sought. Construction began immediately on what Reeves called the sanctuary, a compound including a central worship hall, dormitories, and a separate residence for himself. According to building permits filed with the county, the official purpose was to create a spiritual retreat center. What wasn't mentioned were the underground rooms being constructed beneath the main building, spaces that would later feature prominently in police reports. By March 1959, 37 members had permanently relocated to the sanctuary. Most severed contact with family and friends, explaining their decision as a spiritual retreat. Temple records show that all transferred their remaining assets to the organization, signing documents that granted Reeves legal authority over their affairs. Something significant changed in Reeves's demeanor during this period. According to Rita Kaufman, his personal assistant who later testified to authorities, he began experiencing what he called nocturnal visitations, episodes where he would wake, claiming to have received divine instruction. Following these episodes, he would often isolate himself for days, emerging with new doctrines and requirements. After these episodes, he was different, Kaufman told investigators. His voice became monotone, his eyes never seemed to blink, and he spoke about purification with an intensity that frightened me. In April 1959, Reeves introduced the cleansing, a ritual involving extended fasting, sleep deprivation, and the consumption of a bitter tea that induced violent vomiting and hallucinations. Laboratory analysis later identified the tea as containing Jimson weed, a powerful and dangerous hallucinogen. All members were required to participate weekly in the cleansing, which left them physically weakened and mentally suggestible. During this same period, Reeves established the Chamber of Reflection, a small underground room where members who questioned his authority or violated temple rules were confined. According to survivors, confinement could last from days to weeks, with only minimal water and no food. Those who emerged appeared dramatically altered, displaying absolute compliance and speaking in flat, emotionless tones. Margaret Brennan's diary entries from this period reveal the chamber's true purpose. "The chamber breaks you completely," she wrote. After 3 days without light, without sound, you begin to lose yourself. After 7 days, you understand there is nothing but doctor's voice. After 14 days, you are empty enough to be filled with truth. By June 1959, Reeves's sermons focused exclusively on what he called the Great Dissolution, a coming event that would separate the worthy from the unworthy. Only those who had completely surrendered their individual will could transcend, becoming part of what he termed the new being. According to temple documents, this transformation would require the ultimate sacrifice, the willingness to abandon physical existence. On July 2nd, 1959, Reeves gathered the vessels and revealed the final stage of his plan. According to Rita Kaufman, he announced that spiritual transcendence required the literal consumption of faith, a ritual in which believers would physically take part in one another's transformation. The exact nature of this ritual remained ambiguous in Kaufman's testimony, but forensic evidence would later suggest its horrifying reality. While preparations for this final ritual advanced at the sanctuary, concerns were growing among families of temple members. Several filed missing persons reports, though police initially showed little interest in what appeared to be adults voluntarily joining a religious organization. This changed when Edward Brennan, Margaret's brother and a deputy district attorney, began his own investigation after being unable to contact his sister for months. Using his professional connections, Brennan discovered the substantial financial transactions surrounding the temple and Reeves's history of legal troubles in 3 other states. More disturbing were the large purchases of chemical supplies, including formaldehyde, lye, and industrial quantities of tranquilizers. Brennan presented this information to the police, who finally obtained a warrant to investigate the sanctuary. On August 15, 1959, officers arrived at the compound to find it apparently abandoned. The building stood empty, personal belongings left behind, as if the occupants had departed suddenly. It was only during a secondary search that investigators discovered the sealed entrance to an underground chamber beneath the main building. What they found inside has never been fully disclosed to the public. Official reports describe evidence of ritualistic activities and conditions inconsistent with public health and safety. Journalists who covered the case reported sources within the department describing scenes of ritualistic depravity and evidence suggesting cannibalistic practices. The most concrete evidence came from a hidden room containing 27 journals meticulously documenting the temple's activities. These journals, written in Reeves's distinctive handwriting, detailed a philosophy that had evolved from spiritual transcendence to something much darker. The belief that consuming the flesh of the faithful would allow their spirits to unite within a chosen vessel. Wait a moment. Before we continue with the most impactful part, tell me in the comments, do you know of any similar case? Leave a like. It makes a difference. Now then, let's get to what no one ever told. The journals also contained the names of 38 temple members who had supposedly ascended through this ritual. Missing persons reports matched many of these names, but no bodies were ever recovered from the property. Extensive searches of the surrounding area yielded nothing, leading investigators to theorize that remains had been chemically destroyed or transported elsewhere. Malcolm Reeves himself disappeared completely. Despite an international manhunt, he was never found. The last confirmed sighting placed him at Los Angeles International Airport the day before the police raid, boarding a flight to Mexico City. From there, his trail vanished. The investigation continued for years, becoming one of the largest in Los Angeles history. Interviews with former members who had left before the final phase revealed a systematic pattern of psychological manipulation. Reeves had carefully selected vulnerable individuals, isolated them from support networks, undermined their sense of reality, and gradually normalized extreme behaviors. According to Dr. Richard Milner, a psychiatrist who interviewed several survivors, Reeves created an alternate reality in which the unthinkable became not only acceptable but desirable. He exploited fundamental human needs for connection, meaning, and transcendence, twisting them into something monstrous. Perhaps most disturbing were the audio recordings found at the sanctuary. Reeves had documented the group's final meetings, capturing his increasingly erratic sermons and the responses of his followers. In one recording, dated August 10th, he speaks calmly about the upcoming communion of ascension. "Your bodies are merely vessels, temporary containers for your eternal essence," his voice explains. "Through the sacred consumption, we will become one being, transcending individual limitations. Those who serve as nourishment achieve the highest honor, becoming eternally part of our collective divinity." The recording continues with the voices of followers expressing enthusiasm for this honor. Most disturbing are the flat, emotionless tones, evidence of what experts would later identify as extreme psychological manipulation combined with drugging. The Temple of Divine Truth case fundamentally changed how law enforcement approached alternative religious movements. It established new protocols for investigating groups showing signs of dangerous isolation and extreme beliefs. But for the families of those who disappeared, there has never been closure. The uncertainty about what happened to their loved ones remains an open wound decades later. 5 years after the investigation began, authorities officially classified Malcolm Reeves as deceased, though many investigators remained unconvinced. Sightings continued to be reported across South America and Europe, though none were ever confirmed. The case file remained officially open until 1983, when it was reclassified as inactive due to lack of new evidence. For decades, the case faded from public memory, referenced occasionally in books about cult phenomena, but largely forgotten. This changed in 2005, when construction workers renovating an abandoned property in Baja California discovered a hidden room containing papers and photographs linking to the Temple of Divine Truth. Among these documents was a journal dated 1967, apparently written by Reeves himself. The journal described establishing a new identity and a small following in a remote coastal village. More disturbing were references to continuing the work with new disciples. Mexican authorities investigated but found the village abandoned, with locals reporting that the residents had left suddenly several years earlier. Once again, Reeves, if he was indeed the author, had vanished before authorities could reach him. The true horror of the Temple of Divine Truth lies not just in what may have happened to its members, but in the methodical way Reeves transformed ordinary people into willing participants in their own destruction. The progression from conventional spiritual seeking to the ultimate taboo occurred through almost imperceptible steps, each preparing the way for the next. As Dr. Helena Rodriguez, a forensic psychologist who studied the case extensively, explained, "What makes this case so disturbing is that these weren't people with histories of instability or violence. They were ordinary individuals, nurses, teachers, office workers, gradually conditioned to accept the unacceptable. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about human vulnerability and the power of manipulation." Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the case is what the journals reveal about the final days at the sanctuary. Entries suggest that the ascension ritual occurred in stages over several days, with Reeves selecting participants in a specific order. Those chosen reportedly displayed a mix of fear and ecstasy, convinced they were achieving spiritual transcendence through their sacrifice. What exactly happened during these rituals can only be pieced together from forensic evidence and the incomplete records. What is clear is that the victims were heavily sedated, likely unaware of what was happening to them. Small traces of human remains found in the underground chamber confirmed investigators' worst suspicions, though the limited evidence made it impossible to identify individual victims. The psychological manipulation that enabled these events followed a clear pattern, one that has been observed in other destructive groups. Reeves systematically isolated his followers, controlled their information, deprived them of sleep and normal nutrition, and induced altered states through drugs and meditation. Under these conditions, critical thinking became impossible, replaced by absolute devotion to Reeves and his increasingly disturbing vision. Former member Thomas Hargrove, who left the group before its relocation to the sanctuary, later described the gradual transformation he witnessed. It happened so slowly you barely noticed. First, it was giving up meat, then fasting occasionally, then regular fasting. First, it was meditating an hour daily, then 3 hours, then all night. Each step seemed logical given the previous one. It's only when I got out that I could see how far things had gone. The Temple of Divine Truth case raises disturbing questions about the boundaries between religious freedom and dangerous exploitation. In the 1950s, few legal mechanisms existed to intervene in religious organizations, even when they showed signs of potential danger. This case, along with others that followed, eventually led to significant changes in how authorities monitor and respond to groups showing warning signs of destructive behavior. In the aftermath, several families of victims formed an advocacy organization dedicated to educating the public about psychological manipulation and helping those who leave controlling groups. Their work has contributed to greater awareness of the warning signs and more effective intervention strategies. For investigators who worked the case, the psychological toll was significant. Detective James Morrison, who led the initial search of the sanctuary, retired early after completing the investigation. In a rare interview given in 1975, he acknowledged that what he discovered had fundamentally changed him. "There are things humans shouldn't be capable of," he said. "What happened there? It stays with you." The case file, now stored in Los Angeles County archives, contains thousands of pages of evidence, interviews, and analysis. Much of it remains sealed, deemed too disturbing for public release. Those who have reviewed the complete file describe it as presenting a comprehensive study in the methodical destruction of human autonomy and the exploitation of fundamental human needs. Psychological studies conducted with former members who left before the final phase provide insight into how Reeves achieved such complete control. He created an environment where questioning his authority was not merely forbidden, but conceptually impossible. Through a combination of charisma, manipulation, isolation, and chemical influence, he reconstructed his followers' reality until his word became absolute truth. The story isn't over yet. But before the final revelation, subscribe to the channel. Every day we post a new documentary about disturbing cases. Now, the conclusion. The most troubling aspect of the Temple of Divine Truth case is not its uniqueness, but its pattern. The same psychological mechanisms Reeves employed have appeared in numerous destructive groups before and since. The human vulnerabilities he exploited, the need for meaning, connection, and transcendence remain universal. As Dr. Rodriguez noted in her analysis, the conditions that made this possible still exist. The potential for similar events remains, requiring constant vigilance. In 2012, a leather suitcase was discovered in the basement of a Mexico City hotel undergoing renovation. Inside were photographs, letters, and a passport bearing the name Michael Reynolds, but containing a photo that experts determined was likely Malcolm Reeves, aged approximately 20 years. The document suggested that Reeves had continued traveling throughout Latin America into the 1970s, possibly establishing small groups in remote areas. Most disturbing was a handwritten manuscript titled The Continuation, which outlined a philosophy virtually identical to that of the Temple of Divine Truth, though using different terminology. The manuscript described the author's ongoing search for perfect vessels willing to participate in the final transformation. Mexican authorities attempted to trace Reeves's movements based on this new evidence, but the trail had long gone cold. If he survived into the 1970s, he would be over 100 years old today, almost certainly deceased. Yet the legacy of his manipulation lives on in the unanswered questions. The families still wondering about their loved one's fate and the broader questions his case raises about human vulnerability. The Temple of Divine Truth stands as a stark reminder of how easily the search for meaning can be twisted into something monstrous. It demonstrates the thin line between spiritual seeking and destructive manipulation. Most importantly, it reminds us that the greatest horror lies not in supernatural threats, but in the human capacity for self-deception and the exploitation of our deepest needs. No definitive evidence has ever proven what happened to the 38 missing members. No mass grave was ever found, no remains conclusively identified. They simply vanished, leaving behind possessions, legal identities, and grieving families. Their disappearance remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. The journals recovered from the sanctuary remain in secure storage, accessible only to authorized researchers. Those who have studied them describe a document that begins with spiritual platitudes and ends with detailed instructions for ritual, murder, and consumption. The transformation of the writing itself, from elegant philosophical discourse to increasingly erratic and disturbing content, mirrors the transformation of the group itself. Perhaps the final word on the case comes from Eleanor Whitman's sister, who spent decades searching for answers about her siblings' fate. In an interview given shortly before her death in 1991, she reflected, "The not knowing is the hardest part. Every unidentified body, every news story about someone found alive years after disappearing, it brings it all back. I've had to accept that I'll likely die without knowing what happened to Eleanor. That's the cruelest legacy of what that man did." The Temple of Divine Truth case files were officially closed in 2010, though they remain available for review by law enforcement agencies investigating similar cases. The property where the sanctuary stood was eventually sold, the buildings demolished. Today, a private residence occupies the site, its owners unaware of what occurred there decades earlier. The case has become a standard study in criminology courses, focusing on psychological manipulation and destructive cults. The warning signs identified through this investigation have helped authorities identify and intervene in potentially dangerous situations before they escalate to violence. For those who study extremist religious movements, the Temple of Divine Truth represents a perfect storm of factors. A charismatic leader with no accountability, vulnerable followers isolated from outside influence, gradually escalating demands for compliance, and a philosophy that justified ultimate sacrifice. Understanding how these factors interacted has proven valuable in preventing similar tragedies. The true number of Malcolm Reeves's victims may never be known. Beyond the 38 documented in the journals, investigators identified at least 12 other individuals who had deep involvement with the temple but weren't listed among the ascended. Their fates remain unknown, their disappearances possibly undocumented in the recovered materials. The final entry in Reeves's journal, dated August 12, 1959, just days before the police raid, reads, "The vessels are prepared. The transformation begins tomorrow. Soon we will transcend individual limitations and become the new being. Those who serve as nourishment achieve eternal unity. Those who consume carry the essence forward. Through this communion, we conquer death itself." 3 days later, when police entered the sanctuary, they found it empty of people, but containing evidence of recent activity. Food remained on plates, beds appeared recently used, and vehicles remained in the compound garage. The impression was of sudden organized departure, but to where and how has never been determined. The last confirmed communication from anyone within the group was a letter sent by Margaret Brennan to her brother Edward, the very person whose investigation would eventually lead authorities to the sanctuary. Postmarked August 14th, the letter contained just 3 sentences. By the time you read this, I will have transcended physical limitation. Do not grieve for me. I have discovered what lies beyond death. So what did you think? Comment your theory about what really happened. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any story. Until the next case, the Temple of Divine Truth case remains officially unsolved. The files gather dust in county archives. The names of the missing gradually fade from memory. But somewhere, perhaps, the truth remains, in unmarked graves, in hidden journals, or in the memories of survivors who have never come forward. The most terrifying aspect is not what we know happened, but what remains hidden, the full extent of human capacity for both manipulation and submission. That darkness continues to haunt us, a shadow that never fully disappears.